Hey everyone, welcome to this video really providing an overview of Azure Security Center and really how that fits in with Azure Sentinel. It's been a topic a lot of people have requested, so I thought it was about time I actually went and did this overview. And the S stands for security. As always, if this is useful, a like, subscribe, comment and share would be appreciated. Now when I think about security in Azure or really anywhere, we always think defense in depth. I want multiple layers of protection. Hey, if I'm thinking about networking, I want distributed denial of service protection. I want web application firewalls. I want to make sure my traffic's encrypted in transit. And then when I've got data stored, I want to make sure it's encrypted at rest. There's all these different layers of things. And so I can think about there are steps I take that are proactive to making sure I've got the right configurations, the right policies in place. Then I think about, well, things that I do to react so there is something happening. You can really think about that distinction between Azure Security Center as a lot more of that proactive type of technology. And then Sentinel is a lot more about reacting if something happens. So we'll start with the idea that we have this Azure Security Center component. And that's doing a huge amount of different things. But we can really think about a huge part of that is kind of that assessment and that kind of remediate. And so to start with, obviously we have to turn on Azure Security Center. Now, one thing I will say up front, one of the things you'll see a lot is log analytics. When we talk about Sentinel, we're always talking about a log analytics workspace. When you turn on Azure Security Center, yes, it does use a log analytics workspace, but that's really only leveraged for, hey, when I have virtual machines and I need to get certain data from the VM. Most of what Azure Security Center is actually powered by is Azure Policy. And that's what feeds a lot of what it knows about in terms of, hey, I need to do these remediations, you're missing these particular things. So let's actually go and look at this. So to get started, you would actually just go to Security Center. So I could think about, well, if I was kind of on home, I could just go and search for security, and there we can see Security Center. Now, if you're accessing this for the first time, it's going to say, hey, we're going to go through, we're going to set up some basic things. It's going to use a log analytics workspace. Now, if you have one already, you could use an existing log analytics workspace. If you don't, it will create one for you. Again, that log analytics workspace is just there for those VM-based alerts. It's not using it for many of the other things. Now, one thing I will say is when I talk about kind of that agent, you can configure that to kind of automatically deploy. If I go under management, and you can kind of see this pricing and settings, well, through here I can go to each of my different subscriptions, let's say Dev, and I'm going to come back to what Defender is, don't worry about that for right now, but you see this second option of auto provisioning. And here, this is where I can go and do things like, hey, look, turn on the log analytics agent for virtual machines. So it will automatically go and deploy that. I could do things like edit the configuration, i.e. which workspace. And I can also turn on that auto provisioning for other types of extensions that are used for other things like Kubernetes, like that dependency agent. You can also do things like, well, look, if there are alerts, I can set up the different types of email notification. Now, you will know I kind of said, well, there's these Azure Defender plans. Don't worry about this yet. So I'm going to focus on the free part. So that's with Azure Defender off. And what you can see it's telling me is, look, I'm going to get this continuous access and security recommendation and this Azure Secure score. So this is really all about thinking that I want those good initial policies in place to make sure I'm checking I have those right things, to make sure I'm really doing good things. And really that's powered by, as I kind of drew here, policy. So policy is something we use to define the certain aspects of configurations of resource I'm looking at. I can bundle those into initiatives, which are sets of policies, and then assign that to a certain scope, for example, a subscription. So what Azure Security Center does is exactly that. It has its own initiatives that it assigns to the subscriptions, and it's through that compliance report, it can then give you a secure score, say how well you're doing and prioritize certain things, and show me my all-up kind of compliance. So we can go back and look at this. So here in my kind of Azure Security Center, I'll actually go and just start on the overview. And I can see straight away I have this kind of secure score. I also have these kind of regulatory compliance things over here. Now, again, this is all driven by policy under the hood. So there's this actual Azure Security baseline that's actually being leveraged now. And that Azure Security benchmark replaces this old Azure Security Center default policy thing it used to have. But we'll talk more about that later on. But we can see I have this idea of a secure score. And I can see, hey, I've got 33% out of a lot of points. So really, I'm not doing too well. And one of the nice things I could actually do here is I could select this secure score, and it shows me, oh, well, actually by subscriptions. And then it actually is going to give me recommendations. Now, these are the same recommendations I'm seeing down here in the bottom right corner as I would just see from the recommendations view. So if I go to recommendations, it's going to show me a whole bunch of different things. So here we can see things like enable MFA, remediate vulnerabilities, enable encryption at rest. Now, if it says preview, it's a configuration that is coming, but it's not quite GA yet. So it's not going to impact that secure score, but I still want to remediate it now before it's part of the secure score. And you can kind of see the relative importance of the things by, well, how many points is it going to give me? Hey, look, MFA gives me 10 points. That must be a really important thing I need to do. Remediate vulnerabilities, again, an important thing. And then get smaller amounts of points, so probably not such a big deal. Now, some of these things will actually have kind of a quick fix. So storage account public access should be disallowed. So with these quick fixes, it will actually push through a configuration to actually remediate those things. We'll actually go and change that setting. Azure policy, remember, doesn't just have to audit or audit if something does not exist, which is by default what Azure Security Center does. It can also kind of deploy if not exists. It can fix things. So these quick fixes can actually let me remediate certain things I actually have here. Now, one of the things you might also have noticed, it's obviously working on what it knows. It shows me the overall resource health. It's telling me, hey, look, you don't have these things. Now, maybe you do have this mitigated through something else. So one of the things I can actually do is, I'm just going to pick one at random. You'll see this option to exempt. So this is up here in the top corner. So when I exempt, I can either exempt entire subscriptions, I can exempt specific resources, if I had those available here. I give a reason, and I say, why is it exempt? Is it exempt because it's mitigated, i.e. I have a different solution doing this, or it's mitigated because I just don't care. I'm accepting the risk. I don't want you to show this to me anymore. And then once you actually do one of these exemptions, this resource that you've exempted, either the subscription or the resource specific, will no longer show. So for example, storage accounts should use customer managed key. I'm kind of down here. You see 29 out of 30. What would actually happen here? Notice I've got an exempted resource. It's showing me one exempted resource over here. And it shows under the not applicable resources, and it will show me why. So it's actually going to show me, hey, it's exempt because they did the waiver. And I could, if I wanted, go and manage that exemption. I could remove it, edit it, whatever I want to do. So if there are recommendations that I really just don't care about, I don't want to see them, I can actually do that exemption. And then I can still track that in the future. Now, the other thing we actually have in here is you do have the option to have kind of workflow automations. So these are these kind of exemption things, but also notice down here under management, I have workflow automation. So I can use workflow automations to do various things. For example, I could call this automation when I get maybe a certain type of threat detection, when I get certain levels of recommendations, when I get a new regulatory compliance standard implemented, for example. So I can actually, instead of maybe just exempting things, well, maybe I actually want to do something. And my action is I can call these logic apps. Remember, logic apps are these really nice graphical kind of flow of steps I'm going to take that are triggered by something. It's a serverless technology, so it's triggered by something. In this case, maybe it's a webhook or a schedule, event grid. Something is going to trigger this workbook to go and do something. So this is great. I have this great security center. I have all these recommendations. So what's powering this? What's that magic? And as I kind of talked about, it's Azure policy. And we can see this. So if we jump back over, what I can actually do is go to security policy. So under management, I can go security policy. Here it's actually going to show me, hey, look, I have assigned my Azure Security Center policy, that baseline policy that it uses, that Azure Security Benchmark, and it's very comprehensive. It's assigned to both dev and lab. So if I kind of click that assignment there, I can see, yes, I've got that assignment. And also I can see these additional regulatory standards. So yes, I can see the Azure Security Benchmark. That is that default that powers Azure Security Center recommendations and Secure Score. There are others. I can also add additional ones. So more are provided out of the box that I could go and add if I wanted to track them. So I can actually go and add them there. I can also add these just via regulatory compliance, manage compliance policies up here at the top. And then once again, select the subscription and say, hey, I want to go and add some more standards, or you can even import additional ones. But fundamentally, what we saw there is the idea that my security policy has been assigned. So it is just a regular Azure policy. So if I now just go and look at Azure policy, I will actually start on, well, firstly, if I look at just my overview, you can see there's this ASC default non-compliant that I'm really not doing very well on. If I look at my assignments, once again, I can see there's this assignment, this ASC default assigned to the subscription here and here, my two subscriptions. And so that's an initiative. If I go to my definitions and just look at initiatives, and then we'll order them by the number of policies. So it's not the top one. There is this NIST SP800 is the top one, but then there is my Azure Security Benchmark. So that's the one I was telling you about. That is now the default. And if we select that initiative, we'll actually be able to see, well, what exactly is making that up. And it's big, so it's taking a while. It's going through. And then we can see all the different policies that are actually used by this initiative. And what we'll see is for the assignments, we can see there those assignments to our subscription. But for the parameters, i.e., what is it passing to each of those policies, it's all going to be audit if not exists, or audit. If I'm doing something else, it's going to have a disabled. Now, when I did those exemptions, remember I had that option to do the exemption. So the exemption is doing something special behind the scenes. So what the exemption is actually doing, there's this Azure policy exemption object, and that will actually set the code to not applicable with a cause of exempt. So when I do an exemption, it's doing an Azure policy exemption behind the scenes. But now I can see everything it's doing is all about these auditing if not exists. It's not deploying if not exists. It's not changing anything. It just is looking and essentially reporting. I can see the default values. I can see everything it can do. But it's fundamentally just looking at stuff. That's really all I'm doing. Now, while I'm here looking at this, so it has that initiative. If you want to easily just turn on Azure Security Center for everything, so here if I search for enable Azure Security, there we go. There's actually a built-in policy that can actually do this deploy if not exists, i.e. it can go and turn on Azure Security Center for me. There are many other things I can actually do in here. So again, this is all about getting me the information to Security Center so it can generate that secure score, so it can give me the recommendations. It's basically just looking at the compliance state of that initiative and then give me all of this great feedback. Now I can also take some of these pieces of information and send it somewhere else. I can integrate with another SIM system, a source solution, log analytics. It's going to automatically integrate with Azure Sentinel. And once again, in this pricing and settings, you'll see there's this option for a continuous export. And I can do this both to an event hub. So remember, an event hub is that publish subscribe mechanism. I can push things to it and something else can subscribe to it. So what I'm saying here is, hey, from Azure Security Center, I can do this push to an event hub, and another SIM solution could be on the other side of that to then take that information. I can also do a log analytics workspace. And you'll notice for both of these, I have options around what do I want to send, recommendations, secure score, alerts, compliance, and I can stream real time, or I can send like a weekly snapshot. So I have these different options of exactly what I want to continuously export. So this is all great. So this is really all about that idea of assessing and remediating, identifying. So this is really about identify. I'm going to find the different threats. Now, there's then an additional step. Well, I actually want to do protection. And so this is when you start to get into more of it. It's still Azure Security Center, so it's still ASC. So I'll expand that line out a bit. It's still part of Azure Security Center, but now we're getting more into Defender. So there used to be something called Azure Security Center kind of standard. That's been rebranded as Azure Defender, really for servers, is really a bulk of that functionality. So what Defender does is it gives me this whole set of technologies to actually protect my workloads, implement different types of protection by looking at different types of signal. Now, this does not actually run on log analytics. There's not really a log analytics workspace. There are certain things part of SQL that uses log analytics workspace, but for the most part, the Defender solutions are just hooking on the back end to various types of telemetry. And this actually offers a whole bunch of different solutions, both very deep for particular technologies like SQL and Azure Container Registry and IoT. And then there are more broad solutions like Azure DNS, Azure Resource Manager. And this I actually have to go and turn on. Now, if we remember, the regular just Azure Security Center without Defender is free. When I turn on Defender, well, I'm going to start paying some money for that. So if we go and look, we can see what we then get if we actually turn on Defender. So let's jump over here. So here we can see once again those Azure Defender plans. And if we turn Azure Defender on, it gives us a whole set of additional solutions here. So just-in-time VM access, adaptive controls and network hardening, regulatory compliance dashboards and reports, threat protections for certain PaaS services. So I turn this on, and then what I can actually do is then turn it on for specific Azure Defender types of resource protection. So here I can see, oh yeah, well, servers and app services and SQL database and SQL on machines, storage account, Kubernetes, container registries, Key Vault, then Azure Resource Manager, Azure DNS. And you'll see they have a cost. So for each instance, I pay a certain amount of money for those actual things. So realize now there is $1 associated with these. And once I actually have this turned on, well, now I can jump over to my security center, and it does show, like in the overview, you can see here I've got things like regulatory compliance. I can see my Azure Defender coverage. I can kind of see those insights, but now I can actually go to Azure Defender. So now it's showing me my overall coverage. So what do I actually have in terms of resources and what am I protecting? I can see what alerts I have. Now, alerts are never generated by default. I have to actually go and turn on alerts. And although you have security alerts just up here, really without Defender, I'm not going to see anything there. There's nothing really is going to be generating alerts by default just from the regular free. Now, there are things I can do, for example. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But really, these alerts are going to come from Defender. They're going to give me this capability to actually do various things. I guess while I'm here, so I mean, if you did want alerts for like the free things, like if there was some kind of recommendation, remember I showed you workflow automations. So I could generate a workflow automation to call a logic app to actually then go and kind of fire off that alert. Or I could also, remember that continuous export, I could send the data, something like log analytics, and I could trigger kind of alerts from there. So there are ways to get things for the free, but when I'm looking at alerts in Azure Security Center, these are really things coming from the various Defender components. Now you see I've got a lot of alerts. Some of these I set up. You see this kind of attacked virtual machine at the bottom here. This is when I was testing the kind of Azure DNS solution. So I did a script to fake a bunch of things. But if you want to test your responses to alerts, there's actually this sample alerts button at the top. And this will actually go and generate you a bunch of alerts. You can pick which sets of technologies you want alerts for. And it will then do all of these great things you're seeing here. And you can see, well, have I got the right kind of responses in place? Maybe it's a workflow automation to respond in that some way. Maybe it's an email. You can see it exactly what's going to happen. So I've got all those nice alerts down there. Also, you've got, remember that inventory, which is going to show me information about all my resources and, hey, what recommendations apply to them. But if I actually go back over to my security alerts, I can see all those different things that are happening in my environment. And now if I actually go, I think it's back on overview for a second. No, go back to my Defender. That's right. If you actually scroll to the right, you'll actually see your most attacked resources. So I can see prevalent security alerts, and I can see my most attacked resources over here. So it's a nice way to quickly go and see what's happening. Okay, so we know how to turn these things on. I can see my coverage. I can see security alerts that are being triggered by various things from Azure Defender. So what else does it give me? So you'll see this advanced protection down the bottom. And these are really those main elements that we have as part of the Azure Defender solution. So you can see, for example, VM vulnerability assessment. So this is actually using Qualys. So Qualys is kind of a third-party solution, and it's going to use that to find vulnerabilities within your workloads that I've enabled this for. Just-in-time VM access is all about manipulating network security groups. So if we remember, if I have a resource like this virtual machine, that virtual machine actually lives on a virtual network. So that's kind of living in a virtual network. And what we do is we apply network security groups at the subnet level typically, but I can put it at the NIC as well, to limit the traffic that can go in and out. Now maybe I want to RDP to that virtual machine. I don't want to leave that port open all the time. So what just-in-time does is it actually lets me configure, I'll show this quick, I can enable a policy so that, well, I have to request access. So here I've enabled it for this resource. You can see here I can configure exactly, well, I've just done it for 3389, but I could add additional ports as well. And I can delete it here, or I can change it. So I can say which protocol, what am I allowing? Is it just one IP or a block that I'm defining? So at the request, I can specify which IP, i.e. mine, and then I can pick a maximum duration. So now when I actually want to use this, I as the user would have to say, okay, I'll go back to my just-in-time VM access. I would select the resource and say request access. We'll only open up those holes in the NSG for the IP I specify for a limited amount of time. I could also just go to the VM directly, select it. I could say connect, and I can say request access. And I can say, was it all configured IPs, my IP, and then that will call the just-in-time and open up that NSG to let me be able to actually connect to it. So that's really what that is doing. Then we have adaptive application control. So what this is doing is using machine learning to look at what are the processes that commonly run on the operating systems and basically create a allowed list of apps. And then I can use that so it actually alerts me if other types of process run. Maybe it's a malware that wasn't picked up by the anti-malware solution. I can group these things together. So it's going to look at what's running and then alert me when something else runs. We have the container image scanning. So what that will actually do is for my Azure Container Registry, when I check in an image, it will actually grab that image, hydrate it somewhere and scan it using the Qualys engine to look for vulnerabilities. And also periodically, it will actually go and look at the image, grab it and scan it as well. So I know my images are healthy. I don't know if I've actually got much in this one. Let's have a look. So if we look here, oh, actually it's showing me. So I've got an unhealthy registry. It's a sad day. And I can see, hey, yeah, I've got one vulnerable image. And it's actually showing me what the vulnerabilities are actually in the image. So that obviously would help me now go, okay, I should probably do a pull request, update something, and get that healthy again. That's obviously not a good place that I want to be. But it's giving me that kind of information. It might show me things like remediation steps. So there we go. I can even see, well, which particular repository is it talking about? And there's the actual image that is causing me the problem. And then I can see the digest about it. There's 8 registry level findings, so I can really dive in and get all of that detail about, well, why is it unhealthy? So then going back again, so we have adaptive network hardening. So remember those network security groups I talked about? Well, they're a set of rules, a set of IP addresses and ports and protocols. So what the adaptive network hardening does is it looks at those exceptions you have that allow things through and says, you know what, you're not using those. So let's lock that down. So it's going to recommend tightening up your NSGs if I'm really not using gaps I have in the NSG. SQL vulnerability assessment is going to go and scan your SQL deployments and look for common types of misconfiguration for vulnerabilities. File integrity monitoring. So it will actually look at the files in your VMs, be it Windows or Linux. If it's Windows, it will look at the registry as well. And it will use change tracking to see, hey, are core files being modified, which might indicate something negative, and then alert. Network map helps me actually see vulnerabilities on my network. So here, right now, it's kind of saying there are no resources found. If I go over and let's say everything, and let's look at all. So here we can see I've got one virtual machine that has a public facing IP here, and I can kind of track the subnet it's in, the network it's in, and the subscription it's in. So it's showing me that complete tracking. But right now that's healthy. It's actually kind of locked down. I can select that. I can see, yes, it has a public IP, but it has just-in-time protection. I can look at allowed traffic, for example. What is it allowed to talk to? I get a lot of great information. But what I can actually do is well, actually just show me everything. So I'm going to change the view. So now I can once again see all the different subnets I have and what's talking to those different subnets. I can see the peerings I have. It's giving me alerts. For example, hey, look, you don't have an NSG assigned to this to this subnet, for example. And then once again, I can see the resources that actually hang off of it. I can see, hey, if there's system updates or system configuration. It's just a nice way to be able to go and see everything about my environment. So again, you kind of pick, hey, is it everything? Is it I just care about internet facing? Again, it's showing me the tracking of the NIC to the subnet, to the network, to the subscription. And then outside of that, then we kind of have Internet of Things. So Internet of Things, a view of all the internet-based devices. I have those Internet of Things devices. And again, these Defender solutions are really just talking to the back-end resources. I'm not paying additional money for Log Analytics Workspace here. I'm paying for whatever resources I've enabled. I'm paying for the plan that enables that. I'm not then paying for like a Log Analytics Workspace. So we have these very deep solutions around SQL and IoT and servers, and these broader kind of DNS ARM solutions. So if I'm really thinking about, so Azure Security Center was very proactive. I'm identifying things and I'm protecting things. And remember, one of the big things we could kind of get out of here was kind of these alerts. So then we get into Azure Sentinel. So we now have kind of this Azure Sentinel solution. And that absolutely sits on top of a Log Analytics Workspace. I can really think about, I can feed things into that Log Analytics Workspace. So it has a whole bunch of connectors. So we have these kind of connectors that come from a huge range of different solutions. And again, I can feed those alerts here as well. So if I think of Azure Security Center as Defender, it's fairly narrow in its scope. You kind of saw the things I could turn it on for. For Sentinel, I can feed in a massive number of different things from here. So I have all these connectors to all these different types of systems. So if this is about identifying and protecting, I can think about, oh, this is now more about actually detecting. So I'm identifying if I've got misconfigurations. This is detecting an attack. This is about responding to an attack. And also it helps me recover kind of from that attack. So this is how they really build together. So very proactive, very reactive. And there is some proactive stuff over here as well I can do around hunting. But really, that's the way they really work together. And I can think about feeding things into Sentinel. So let's actually go and look at it. So the first step is, if I actually go over here, and let's go and look at Sentinel. Now, I have to get those logs in. So it's going to use a Log Analytics Workspace. And you can see straight away I have this kind of nice overview. And this is really super, super broad. This is adding all these different connectors. So typically where the place would start is I can see over here from the overview, hey, events over time. I can see the different potential malicious events that are happening, configuration data. But you're going to start over here. Once you've turned this on, enabled it, you're going to have these data connectors. Now remember, you're going to hear lots of terms like SIM and SOAR and XDR. So SIM is a security incident and event management solution. So this is Sentinel. It's getting these incidents, these events. And then a SOAR is a security orchestration automated response. The ability to do something when there is an incident. And this is where we're going to get into things like Playbooks and just extended detection and response, XDR. So these are the data connectors. And you can see there's 94 connectors. look at the breadth of what this can actually get signals from. And again, this goes beyond what Log Analytics can do on its own. Sentinel is adding additional connectors to bring data into that Log Analytics workspace. So we have these huge numbers of connectors that are available. And so you're going to turn these on for the systems you have to get the data in. Now realize there is obviously a cost to that. I pay for that data ingestion and I kind of pay for that data storage. So that's where the cost element of Sentinel is going to actually come in. So I'm paying for that. There are capacity reservations I can use, but fundamentally this is where I'm paying the money for that kind of Log Analytics workspace to get the data in. And the whole point of what Sentinel is doing for me, so yes, it's that SIM, that SOAR solution, is it's looking at that Log Analytics workspace and it adds things like machine learning. So it's doing smart stuff to actually identify, I can get all the signals in the world. I can get feeds and feeds of logs coming into me. It's pretty much useless. Just getting feeds of logs is meaningless unless I can correlate them and do something intelligent to really mean, well, look, that and that together means this. So that's what Sentinel is doing. Sentinel is taking those huge feeds of logs from all these different places and has the intelligence to correlate them and then draw some meaningful alert from them, for example. It can do analysis which triggers those alerts. So we have the connectors we turn on to get stuff into Log Analytics workspace that now Sentinel can do something. So what does it do? So I just said it, we have to do that analysis. So the first thing we have here is once we have the connectors, we can do analytics. So analytics you can think about are rules. These are rules that are built on the Kusto query language. Remember, Kusto is what we use to query Log Analytics. So I write these rules which are going to generate alerts. Now I can create these from scratch. I can create a scheduled, I can do it in response to something else. But I'll show you both of those quickly. Notice, one of the things you have here is an incident settings. So I could actually make it generate an incident when this is triggered. And I can even automatically group them. So I could group to say, hey, if I get a certain number within a certain amount of time, and they have some common entity, group them together under the incident. But rather than me manually trying to generate this rule, there are rule templates. And there are a lot of them. So most of the common things you're probably going to want to alert from, it has here. And what it will actually do is I can see details. If I do this one, like MFA disabled for a user, it's showing me the Kusto query language, the KQO it's going to use to find it. And it's going to show me what is required. So if it's for Azure AD, it needs the audit logs, and that's green. That means I have that turned on. When it's gray, i.e. from AWS, I don't have it. So which means I wouldn't be able to trigger for AWS. It would still let me turn it on, but realize, hey, that's not going to work that well. Then I can do things like, hey, here, a brute force attack. Well, hey, I need the Azure AD signing logs. I've got those. I'll be good. And it's showing me the query. And I could create that rule. So we can just go and turn that on quickly. And then when I turn that on, it lets me do those things like the rule logic. I could customize things. I could set, hey, yes, I want to create instant. I want to group them together. Do I want an automated response? I can just skip all of that. And I'll say create. So I can actually now go and create rules to actually help me go and find those brute force attacks. So the rule templates will show me what it needs, i.e. the data that has to be coming in for me to actually work that stuff out if it's actually happening in my environment. So those things, those rule templates are the things I'm most likely actually going to want to alert on. So I can think about, well, the step kind of one in this would be that analytics. So, hey, I've got kind of my analytics. So those are kind of my rules. Now, then I may want to do something. Remember, those rules can do things like alerts, incidents. Well, now I might want to actually do something. Yes, it's great, it's going to alert me and I'll see it in the portal, but I actually want to do something. So now what I can actually do is kind of fire off, I can have these playbooks. And like many things, a playbook is a logic app. You're going to see that kind of in most things, we're going to use these logic apps. So now if I jump over, so the next step would be, okay, I'm going to create a playbook to automatically do something. And I can do add a playbook, and now I'm going to create a logic app, is essentially what's going to happen here. I create the logic app that I'm then going to call. Well, that's fairly tough in a way to actually know what to do. But I can cheat. So there is a GitHub repository, and these are a huge number of Azure Sentinel playbooks. From here I can do things like block an Azure AD user, block an Exchange IP, block an on-prem AD user, close an incident, comment on something. I can enrich different things and I can do emails. Huge numbers of different things that I can do. And I can click on one. So I can click it and say deploy. So this will actually go and now create that logic app for me that I can now use. I can use that now to trigger and automatically do something. So when we think about that all up idea of, well, detecting, great, I'm detecting stuff in my analytics. Hey, I want to respond. Well, they can be my playbooks. My playbooks will actually now help me respond. I can automatically do something when those things actually happen. So I'm putting those different things together. So they're two of the biggest things you're going to do. I absolutely have to get my analytics in place to get the rules for things I care about. And then if I want to do automated response, I have the playbooks. Even without that, remember, I can still go into my Azure Sentinel and I can still go and look at, well, what incidents do I have? I can just go and kind of see those things. I don't have any right now, which is awesome. But there's also workbooks. So if I think a workbook is powered by KQL, it lets me present information in different ways. And again, these are really just Azure Monitor workbooks. So here, once again, there's a huge number of templates available. And what they're going to need is certain pieces of information. So once again, I have this required data type. So I need Azure Diagnostics. So this is Azure Distributed Denial of Service Protection Workbook. I can view the template and I can see, well, what would it show me? So it gives me this kind of view of stuff. This one's not super interesting. I've got this Azure AD audit activity and sign-in logs. And this one, I can see I've got these 3 different sources of data, and I actually have that one under my workbook. So that's one I selected and I kind of saved it. That's over there. And I can actually view my saved workbook. And there it is. And the great thing is, because it's a workbook, it's got this data kind of pre-packaged. So I can very nicely see all these pieces of information. But it is a workbook. I can edit this. If it's not exactly what I want, I can customize it. Because remember, I've saved it now. I can actually edit this and change anything I want in here so it exactly matches what I want. So yes, they have a whole set of kind of templates that I can just go and view straight away to see information. But I can also save it, edit it, do exactly what I want. So that's what I think about. Okay, so great. I've got kind of that overview. I can go and directly run KQL queries against logs. I can see my instance, my workbooks. Now, the next thing I can actually do is hunting. So this is where, well, I'm being proactive. I'm looking for things that may not ordinarily have analytics rules, but may be indicative of something unusual happening. You can see all these, well, consent to applications, rare audit activity, initiated by an application, and it's just KQL queries. I can run the query and then view the results. So it's just a whole bunch of KQL that might indicate, well, something's not quite right. So it lets me actually go hunting, looking for signs of things that I want to know about. So there's a whole bunch of these you can go and look for. grouped by different types of attacks. And once again, it kind of shows me what the various data sources are that I would actually need to be able to run this. Then you have notebooks. So notebooks, this is really kind of I guess, bring your own machine learning. It's a Jupyter notebook, which is a way to actually write machine learning in various languages like Python. And it's really similar to hunting, but with machine learning. It's still querying data. So once again, I still need the right connectors. So you can see here, hey, they utilize data types over here to actually be able to utilize this and then go and get this behavior around whatever the particular topic is. I guess the other major thing, obviously, is like entity behavior. So this is about getting meaningful insights by profiling the different behaviors of users and various entities. And then threat intelligence. So Sentinel has its own set of kind of intelligence about threats. But there are like research people, there are threat intelligence vendors that can provide indicators of compromise. Maybe it's known bad IPs or DNS or whatever that is. So this actually enables me to add some new feeds. And these typically come in this taxi format, trusted automated exchange of intelligence information. And I can kind of go and add these for this kind of new feed. You can see the types of threats, the valid, etc. And so this is where I can actually go and add just these various informations from. So that, I guess, from a very high level, is how I think about a lot of these different functionalities and really how they fit together. So again, we have the idea of Azure Security Center is phenomenal in terms of that identifying where maybe I've not got the right configuration, really assessing and helping remediate misconfigurations really through Azure policy. Then we have these enhanced protections really through those Defender add-ons. And then we can actually move into, well, to detect the responding, the recovering through the various connectors to get the feeds of information into Log Analytics workspace. Then we apply various queries and machine learning to trigger rules for analytics. I can automatically do things through Playbooks. And then we have kind of the workbooks, the hunting, notebooks and more to actually then maybe go and look for things that are maybe indicative of something bad happening. But that's kind of the high level view. I hope that helped. Go and try it out. Again, you've got the free Azure Security Center. You can at minimum get a lot of benefit from that. So use that, go and find things with those high scores for your secure score that make the biggest difference. Do those things first. There's a trial for Defender. So you could get that, I think it's 30 days or something. So you can go and see that. You can turn it on for different things if there's things you care about more. And then again, go and look at the Sentinel. And again, you pay for the data ingested and that retention. So depending on how much you bring in, that will change what you pay for the Sentinel solution. So that's it. Go and get secure. Until next time, take care.